Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming out. And while it's a rainy day, and we know that people are very busy, but we appreciate those of you who are here, and we very much appreciate all of the representatives from the VA and the State Veterans Division who are here. This is an opportunity for us to answer questions for folks about the PACT Act. And let me begin by introducing Bill Goodrow, who is the director of the New Hampshire Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services. So nice to have you with us, Bill. Ina Lima, who is the executive director of the VA Boston Regional Office, the head of the benefits office.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, everyone.
And of course, we all know Kevin Forrest, who is the director of the Manchester VA, and Brett Rush, who is the director of White River Junction VA. And we especially appreciate everyone's taking time out to talk about the PACT Act, which is the biggest expansion of veterans benefits in my lifetime, and I think has created the presumption of coverage for certain conditions. If you don't have to prove that it's service-connected anymore, which is the most exciting thing about it. If you can show that you served in a particular area, that you have a certain condition, then you are covered for that condition under the PACT Act. And because we have a small group today, I think maybe it would be good to do introductions. That would certainly be helpful to me, and we'll start with you, Trooper.
Oh, great. My name is Seth Garr. I'm a trooper with the New Hampshire State Police. I'm the peer support coordinator, and I handle all the veterans issues in the state police, and for all law enforcement, I go all over the state just about every day. And Senator, thank you so much on behalf of the state police and Commissioner Quinn. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Greg Garbone. I know I'm wearing veterans count, but I'm representing the Association of the United States Army. I was the chapter president for New Hampshire, but I am now the region president, so I cover all from Maine to Delaware. That's my new duties. But,
wow.
Senator, thank you very much for having us.
Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Chris Scott, and I work for Senator Shaheen, and kind of sent out the invites for this, so thank you all very much for coming here today.
My name's Ellie Small, and I'm an intern for Senator Shaheen.
My name is Cody York, and I'm also an intern for Senator Shaheen.
Mike Lopez, a service officer for the Disabled American Veterans.
Roland Six, retired military and interested in learning more.
Army, Air Force?
Navy.
Navy.
I'm Allie with Senator Shaheen's office.
Good morning, I'm Lindsay Hatch. I am the executive assistant to Dr. Rush.
Hello, Ken Christopher with Manchester VA.
Wayne Parra, I'm the department adjutant for the American Legion, state of New Hampshire.
I'm Kaylee Griffin. I'm with Senator Shaheen's Constituent Services team.
I'm Cassia Burns. I'm on the Senator's Communications team.
Kyle Heavey, Manchester Public Television.
Gene Gosselin, Vietnam Veterans of America, Chapter 41.
Dennis Carrard, State Commander for the VFW.
Antoine Stabard, RVSR from VBA, Director Lima is my director.
Sumata Duff is Assistant Coach for VBA. Director Ina is my director.
Well, thank you, Art. I think we missed the gentleman in the back.
No, what's up? I'm just part of the management here.
Great, we're glad you're here. Well, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin to begin, but one of the things that I think would be helpful for me to know as we're talking about what we need to do in Washington is to hear the challenges that you're having, what you're hearing from veterans, and the opportunities that you think this presents for veterans.
All right, well, thank you, Senator Shaheen. Thanks, everybody, for coming. So, you know, like Senator Shaheen had mentioned, I mean, the biggest legislation we've seen in the last 30 years, certainly in my lifetime of serving in the Army, and I just think it's wonderful after looking through the last year of veterans continuing to come in and seek you know, benefits and health care in numbers that they really hadn't before. And I think it's a lot of it, you know, the outreach that we've done. I'll say the Manchester VA just has a crackerjack outreach team that looks at just about every event through the state where veterans would frequent. Even long before the PACT Act, it was their mission to get out there and really apprise people of benefits and encourage folks to enroll. And, you know, just this year, we've had over 160 outreach events, and those will continue into, you know, the end of August, September, and even into next fiscal year. Outreach really never stops. And, you know, we've had, in the last year, since the beginning of the PACT Act, but, well, for New Hampshire veterans, between Dr. Rush and I, you know, over 1,400 new enrollees in VHA healthcare that we've looked at between, you know, the two facilities. And that continues. For, you know, as we look at getting out there and apprising people of their benefits, you know, I would say a challenge or just a mission is continuing to get exposure to veterans that may never have frequented the VA before, especially in rural areas. So we leverage, you know, media, TV, the internet, whatever we can do to encourage a veteran to seek more information and enroll in benefits. And I think we see the stories over and over and over for someone that comes in as a Vietnam era veteran, or in many cases a World War II, you know, veteran that we still serve, saying, I wish I had come in here sooner. And so, you know, it's really my mission to get out to all of those just shy of, you know, 100,000 veterans in New Hampshire, and make sure that they know what their benefits are and encourage them to enroll. And so it's just been wonderful, the partnership between the state, the congressional delegation, the VBA, in partnership with us of bringing folks in. And so I'll start with that, and then maybe Ina can fill in some blanks, I think, with the specific benefits data. But it's been great so far.
Thanks, Kevin. Certainly, and Senator, you and I had a chance to talk when I first arrived at the event, and I think Kevin hit the nail on the head, is the importance of us being able to get out there and expand the level of outreach that we've had. Without a doubt, this year has been unprecedented in terms of the numbers of claims that VBA has received. Thus far, we've received over 840,000 claims that have been completed on the VBA side. We've paid out almost $2 billion. Here in the state of New Hampshire, we've completed over 1,500 claims, and we have paid out over $6.2 million to veterans and survivors just in the state of New Hampshire alone. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's still a lot of outreach to be done, particularly in those underserved areas, not only here in New Hampshire, but across the nation. And so VBA has been working in concert with VHA and trying to identify what are those key areas in which we can target for future outreach efforts. And you've asked, you know, how can we help? I think really being focused on how can we expand resources towards that outreach would be great. Kevin and Brett have amazing teams that are dedicated to outreach on the VBA side. The percentage of employees that are dedicated towards outreach are smaller, just by the sheer numbers of how large the organization is. But we've really been leveraging what they can do to amplify our reach, and also partners like the VSOs as well, to be able to get out to those parts of the state that we typically can't be. But really, we continue to be narrow focused on that. I just had a mini town hall with all three of the offices I'm responsible for, and everybody is ready and focused on mission, trying to be able to get out the word the best we can and amplify our local outreach teams with our employees and claims processors that can help and be able to expand and educate as best as we can within the region.
That's great. And Brett, I was up in the Upper Valley yesterday talking about housing and childcare, but one of the benefits, obviously, to northern New Hampshire and the Upper Valley is having White River Junction and the VA hospital there. Can you talk about how in that particularly rural part of New Hampshire and Vermont, obviously, the particular challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, I'll start with some challenges, Senator, and then I'll talk about my perspective on the opportunity here. And I'll just start by saying I'm a physician and a director both, but I was a physician first, and so whenever these things come up, my wiring wants me to respond like a physician. So I'll tell you a little bit about what I think, how I think this is going to matter in veterans' lives from a doctor's perspective. You're right, and we've talked about it before. Our main challenges in the Upper Valley are affordable housing and being able to recruit people to come work. It's not that they don't want to come work at White River Junction or the Upper Valley. It's just very hard to do. It's very expensive to live there. The housing is not easily available. Childcare is not easily available. So those are all concerns, but you know, we are succeeding beyond what I think expectations otherwise would suggest because of many of the incentives that the PACT Act and other recent legislation has brought to bear that allows us to pay people fair wages and to help people afford to move to areas that they might otherwise not be able to, like in the Upper Valley. And so I don't know, frankly, that we'd be able to recruit nurses and doctors and the people that need to do the care that we're talking about if not for legislation like this and others that have come of late. And so for that, we're grateful. You know, we probably wouldn't be successful without that. You know, as far as the PACT Act itself, you know, and how it's going to, I think, affect veterans' lives, I think about two members of my own family from different eras and the different experiences that they're going to have because of this. One being my father-in-law, who was a Vietnam veteran, Air Force, had profound Agent Orange exposure during his time in Vietnam, and suffered a lifetime of cardiovascular consequences. Now, for most of his life, we didn't talk about that being a truth or a phenomenon, so I'm not sure he would have really known. And in fairness, he behaved in ways that contributed to his cardiac disease, you know, over the course of 40 years. But there's no question in my mind that Agent Orange contributed and sort of hastened, you know, his progression, right? And we had fewer years with him, especially at the end of his life, when he could have spent more time with my wife and his grandchild and all of that. And so it's hard not to have a little bit of sense of sadness about that. And I've often wondered, you know, especially now, had we done this, you know, in the past, what could have it been like for him? I think, you know, had something like this happened shortly after his return to Vietnam, it could have changed the course of events in his life in a very positive way. And so that's bittersweet. But then I look at my brother-in-law, who is a Vermont veteran, 30 years Army, many deployments to Afghanistan, constant burn pit exposure. He gets care within the White River Junction Health. We're watching him closely. He has spots on his lungs. There's no doubt why they're there, right? He has no other reason for them to be there but for this, right? His story is going to end up much differently, though, you know, compared to that of our father-in-law, because he's going to have his entire retirement's worth of care and attention between now and the end of his life. And to me, that's the bottom line here, right? Is that we have an opportunity now to treat veterans from Afghanistan and Iraq and all sorts of other places completely differently than we did for folks like Charlie, right? And it's hard to really know for sure what that's all going to mean in the end, but like I think we all feel that this is like a huge difference, right? And it makes me proud, frankly, to be part of that, right? Just knowing that it's going to be different and that we can be there for people. And you know, in the short term, you know, we just want to get people enrolled. Like what we know, what I can tell you just as a physician is that the most important thing is to be enrolled in healthcare, right? It might not matter today, exactly. Like there might not be some immediate reason that you're not sick today, you don't need to see this doctor today, right? But 10 years from now, the fact that you had been seeing that doctor that entire time it matters a lot, right? And so I think the game has just completely changed now in a way that we're only scratching the surface on what that's going to look like. And I know that there are deadlines and such that we have to contend with in the short term in terms of getting people enrolled and everything, but this is a marathon, not a sprint in my mind. And we have 20 years of work ahead of us to make sure that we see today's veteran through to a different outcome than the kind that Charlie and his Vietnam counterparts experienced, right? And that is something I'm very excited with, and I'm glad to see everybody here because I can tell you feel the same way, and I just want to say, you know, I'm sure that Vera would be very grateful to know that, you know, other veterans are being given a chance that her husband didn't have, right? And so thank you for that.
Well, thank you all. Bill, can you talk about what's happening in the state and what you're hearing?
Yeah, so I can discuss that. I want to kind of mention my perspective of veterans benefits. First, I'm a 30-year Navy veteran, retired in 2016. I thought I was going to do 90 years in the military. I just loved being in the Navy. I loved what I did. But then I got this job, and I would never go back. I would never go back to the Navy. I just love what I do every day. I get to help veterans. One of the biggest challenges in the perspective that I see is veterans don't understand their benefits. Probably the biggest question I get, what are my benefits? I served 4 years, 15 years, 20 years. I don't know what my benefits are. It's a hard question to answer because it's kind of a loaded question. So from the perspective of benefits, everybody understands that you served in the military. There's some benefits there. It really depends on what you did in the military and how long you did it for. If you did 4 years and you walk away from the military, there's not a whole lot there for you. You get the handshake on the way out the door, thank you for your service, and that's pretty much all the service is going to provide for you. If you do 20 years or you give them a lot more of your life, you're going to get more benefits out of that. You're going to get a retirement check, and they're going to allow you to keep your health care. So then we go to what the VA does. So the VA is another benefit that the veterans have. And of course within health care, and then of course, you know, things like home loan guarantees and education benefits, and we also get folk rehab, and then of course the cemetery benefits. So there's a lot of great benefits that the VA has, and those don't change very much from year to year. I mean, obviously the laws change, which changes, you know, some of the service connections that are granted, and have obviously brought PACT Act into this conversation. But that's pretty much doesn't change. That world doesn't really, we don't get any groundbreaking new benefits every day. And then every state that you go to, they have their own benefits. So their states acknowledge that the service provides some things, the VA provides some things, but they don't think it's enough. So legislators get together and they provide additional benefits, things like property tax credit, free admittance to state parks, discounts for fishing and hunting. Depends on what state you're in as to what kind of benefits you're going to get. And then there's those charitable organizations like Homeland Heroes and Building Dreams for Marines, who go out and help veterans who have difficulties repairing their home. So these are charitable organizations that realize that there are veterans benefits from the state, from the federal, but they say that's not enough. We need to provide additional benefits as well. And those are all over the place, and all kinds of great benefits in that regard. And of course, then there's the philanthropics and then the nice guy benefits. You go to your local grocery store and you tell them you're a veteran and they give you a discount. So there's a lot out there for benefits. It's just really, really hard to understand. I call it the umbrella of benefits, and I feel what my job is figuring out how to get you under that umbrella. My mission as a director of veteran services is figuring out how to get you under this wonderful umbrella of veteran services, veteran benefits. PACT Act is another way to get you underneath the umbrella. You know, things like the hypertension, it's a new condition added as a result of the PACT Act. The burn pit veterans, it's just another way to bring more veterans under this group, this big umbrella that we have for veterans benefits. I will tell you, with the approval of PACT Act, the passing of PACT Act, it has challenged the office. It's been very, very busy. I would say the majority of our phone calls are PACT Act related phone calls. Very lot of confusion out there as to what it means and what it is. Veterans will call me up and say, I want to sign up for PACT Act. I'm like, well, it's not anything you signed up for. You know, I explain it to them. I help them understand what it is and how to go about, you know, applying for benefits. Of course, now with this deadline, we're getting a lot of phone calls, people trying to get in before the deadline, and they don't even know what they're trying to get in for. They just know they need to get in.
Yeah, explain the deadline, will you?
So essentially what the deadline is Congress establishing the fact that, and I'm going to take a guess, it's because there's a lot of money involved here. There's a lot of money.
Congress never looks at that.
If we retro everybody back to, you know, the way they do it for some of these other conditions that we have, like Agent Orange, there would be a lot of money there. So they've established that if you apply between now, or sorry, August of last year and August of this year, August 9th is the deadline, you get retro back to August of last year. So there's an opportunity to catch a year of extra retro. Normally what happens if you submit a claim today, if it gets adjudicated 6 months from now, they'll retro you back to the day you filed your claim. If you file a claim today, because today is the last day before the deadline, and it's a PACT Act related claim and they approve that, they're gonna retro you back to August of 2022. But if you don't have a PACT Act related condition, there is no retro, so it doesn't apply to you. And that's the panic I'm getting. My barber called me yesterday and said, Bill, I want to sign up for PACT Act, I have one more day. And he's a Gulf War veteran, and I said, so do you have any of the conditions on the list? Well, no, I want to make sure I get signed up for it though. I was like, there's no retro to be had if you don't have, thank God you don't have any of the conditions on the list. That's not a want of any of us. We don't want to have any of those conditions, they're nasty. If you've looked at the burn pit list, it is nasty. You don't want any of those conditions. But if you do have one of these conditions, PACT Act gives you the ability, if you get it filed before tomorrow, it gives you the ability to go and get retro back to August of 2022.
And I think it's important, and correct me here if I'm saying this wrong, but if people miss the deadline tomorrow, they're still eligible for PACT Act benefits. It's just not the year's retroactivity. And that I think there's some confusion about.
Absolutely. Definitely some confusion there. They think they're missing something completely. They're not going to be able to get their hypertension service connected if they don't do it before tomorrow. And obviously that's not the case.
I mean, Ina, can you talk about the presumption piece of under the PACT Act, which I think is very different? I know that in our office we spend a lot of time working with veterans who are trying to get their benefits, and for years there's been a challenge of proving that your whatever your condition is service related, and that's been a huge challenge. That's no longer true under the PACT Act for certain conditions and certain service.
So there are 26 conditions that have been recognized under PACT Act that are considered to be presumptive conditions. And what that word means is that VA is presuming or assuming that if you have one of those conditions of record, you are considered to be service connected for that particular disability, and the veteran doesn't have to go out and prove that they are in fact service connected for those disabilities. And it is causing a lot of confusion. I mean, even understanding what that word, that terminology is, it has been something that has existed for a long time in the rating process. However, with this, adding this many conditions to the list has really expanded how many veterans actually can be considered for service connection for those conditions.
Senator.
Yes.
So my view of presumption is it's one heck of a gift from the VA. Not the fact that you're exposed to Agent Orange, the fact that 50 years later, if you develop type 2 diabetes, you don't have to prove you got it because you were exposed to Agent Orange. It's automatically given to you as a presumptive by the VA. So that is a gift. And let's be honest, if you look at the list of presumptions, there's not a single condition on there that is exclusive to veterans. Anybody can get those conditions, right? So it is one heck of a gift. You could be 500 pounds eating cake at every meal, get told you got type 2 diabetes today, but if you served a day in Vietnam, the VA is going to say you got it because of Agent Orange. That is a gift. So veterans just kind of need to understand how that presumptive process works. So that's, and that we help people obviously with that every day.
And Kevin, you pointed out that there's toxic screenings that are part of this as well.
Yeah, I think, like Bill had mentioned about, certain benefits, if you're in for a short period of time, maybe you're not eligible for the full, complement of benefits of somebody who served, 20 and 30 years. But when we're doing our outreach, I just always caution everybody, those are all assumptions. It's getting them in the door and letting the experts go through and look at that. For the toxic exposure screen, when someone files a claim, we are required to do a toxic exposure screen on every veteran that's with us. We've done over 16,000 to date, which is about half our population of the veterans enrolled in New Hampshire. I've gone through the toxic exposure screen as well as many people in the room here, I think, that are veterans. And it's important because while we've talked about, burn pits and deployments and all kinds of things, you know, that lead to some of these presumptive conditions. You know, when you go through the toxic exposure screen, which is a very deliberate process in going through, there's all kinds of occupational exposures in the nature of our military jobs that may not necessarily be downrange or in there that are, you know, still be looked at as contributing to, you know, to those conditions. And so it's a very deliberate process. You know, it takes about 10 minutes, you know, for an initial screen where the provider will go through and ask all kinds of questions, you know, family history, where you grew up, the types of jobs you've had, the locations you've been, and depending on how you answer those questions, you know, the kind of algorithm of questions continues. And it's really, I think, important to get a lot of that into your medical record, because like we said, no one wants any of these presumptive conditions, but you know, even if you're kind of all clear now, you know, if it's 15 years down the road and you develop, you know, any kinds of concerns, having that toxic exposure screen really at the onset and then every 5 years after becomes really important as part of your medical care and helping your care team, you know, understand just occupational exposures and things that you have been to.
So one other perspective that I have on the importance of these screenings happening now, you know, I even said before, you know, my father-in-law had Agent Orange exposure, and I feel in my soul that that contributed to his later illness. But science doesn't necessarily support that. It's not known as a fact of science the way that other things are necessarily known. There are the things that we all experience and strongly believe, and then there's the scientific process that proves something as fact. And those kind of are on different schedules a lot of times. And the fact of the matter is we actually don't know for sure that burn pits cause lung cancer and how that happens, right? We presume it, right? And it is a gift that it's presumed, because it skips the part where we have to sort of fight over that for the next 10 to 20 years and just allows all the doctors and nurses to work with veterans to provide necessary care. That's great. But we also do need to spend the next 10 to 20 years learning how all of this actually is going to work from a scientific perspective. Like, we actually need to learn, okay, are the burn pits causing these different kinds of cancers, and if so, how, right? Because only by that process will we be able to prevent future cancers from happening, right? Which is the true goal, of course, of all of this, right? So getting as many veterans as possible into the system as early as possible and being able to work with you over the next 10 to 20 years, it's crucial, right? We need to be able to do that if we're truly going to overcome this situation, right? And so, you know, again, that's another reason I say that this is a marathon and not a sprint, right? There's what we want to do for all of you right now, but then there's sort of, we have to actually learn what all of this really means and how it happens. So, and the screenings, that's sort of the starting point for that whole process.
And I think just devoting money to research
Yeah,
for that was all part of, you know, another arm of the PACT Act there for exactly that reason.
It's also important to understand that toxin exposure is not the same gift as every other presumptive that we have on the books. Toxin exposure is a little bit more challenging. Again, exposure for Agent Orange related diabetes is easy, right? You get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. You served in Vietnam, Bob's your uncle, you get service connected for type 2 diabetes. Toxin exposure is a lot different. So we're all exposed to toxins. Anybody who served in the military, anybody who lives life, anybody who exists as a human being, you're exposed to toxins. So what toxin caused that problem? Is it a toxin that you had in the military? Is it a toxin that you have in under your kitchen sink or in your garage? So there's a challenge with toxin exposure. What really happens, unfortunately, with the toxin exposure, it requires a doctor to say, in my professional opinion, I believe the cancer that you have was probably caused by a toxin exposure. That's where the challenge is. How many doctors are willing to step on that limb and say that I believe that this condition is absolutely caused by exposure to some toxin? So those are going to be much more challenging. They're not the same gift. You know, with, again, type 2 diabetes, 1 + 1 will equal 2. In a toxin exposure case, 1 + 1 might not always equal 2. So it becomes a lot more challenging. And of course, the frustration and the sense of loss or the sense of disrespect that a veteran feels when they're being told that their condition is not what they think it is, or not connected to what they think it is, those become the challenges.
I wanted to go back to something Brent said, and I think it's the value of the medical sciences being collected from these toxic exposures from a benefit side. And we have had a lot of discussions at the administration level about how do we share that information that's being harvested from all of the research that has been done, all the data collection points that have been done to determine if there's other conditions that can be service connected. Without a doubt, you know, throughout the past couple months as I've been out speaking to veterans, a lot may come in with a condition that is not on that presumptive list, and they are feeling left out in a way or unrecognized for that condition. Know that VA is looking at that. We're looking at a list. There's quite a long list of conditions out there that we're working with VHA in researching, determining what is that medical science. And like Brett said, it's not going to happen overnight. It is going to take a long time to really look through the science, look at the studies. What is it telling us to determine whether those opportunities are there? The Secretary always has the authority to add other presumptive conditions, obviously, under his authority. However, we want to be able to look expansively at what else is there that could be considered as well.
I know there may be questions from some of you who are here, so feel free to, yes, Mike.
Somebody comment on the younger veterans. It seems that the PACT Act, a lot of the older veterans, your statistics of 840,000 or 1,500 in New Hampshire. The older generation submitted their application, but I'd like to know, as a service officer, because we don't see a lot of young people that are coming in and asking us, but do you see that? You assure us that the younger veterans coming back are being taken care of. You get my question?
Yes, I do. I don't have visibility on the demographics of the applicants that have come in for New Hampshire or any of the states that we have, but I can tell you anecdotally when we look at the percentage of claims that have been granted, about 80% of the claims that have been submitted have been granted positively, meaning we have granted a service-connected benefit to a veteran. Number one contention that has been claimed has been hypertension. So that's indicative to me that we are getting towards those Vietnam veterans that are coming in applying for hypertension as a condition, followed by some of the other cancers that were listed on that presumptive list. I just don't know how many of the people that have applied thus far are of a younger generation. I don't have that information.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, if I may, because a lot of younger veterans that we talk to, they don't have anything going on, and maybe the doctor could.
I can speak to this. Yeah.
You understand my point?
I do. So your observation is correct. If you look at all the VAs across the country, there's no question that more of the folks that are going through screenings and getting new benefits are people who are already enrolled, veterans who are already enrolled but are getting additional service connection and additional applications. So what you're experiencing is the common experience right now, okay? That being said though, I think we are, I can only speak for White River Junction, we are seeing more young enrollees over the past year than we had seen in previous years. And so I'm not having a sense of anguish or hopelessness about that. As I'm sure you experience, it's very hard to convince a young, healthy person to care about things like this, right? Like, it's just not on their radar, really. I think that's actually mostly okay. Deadlines about retroactive benefits probably aren't that meaningful to that person anyways, right? And they're not going to miss out on the long-term benefit of all of this if they don't get in and race to get enrolled today, right? But what they do know is that they can do that, and whenever they're ready for that, then we'll be there for them, right? And so I don't know that we need to feel an immense set of pressure in the short term to get all of those younger veterans through the door all at once. What we really want to do is suggest to them, when you're ready, we're going to be ready for you, right? And I think that's a message that they'll accept. But it's, again, it's very hard. There's very little you can say to convince a young person that's healthy that they need to go and prioritize this sort of thing. I think that's okay, right? Like, I don't think we have to talk them out of that youthful mindset. But someday their circumstances will change and they'll know that we're ready for them, right? And they'll know. I'm confident of that.
Yeah,
Don't
from
you
the
also think, I'm
Sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
So for the perspective of a VSO, I would say we're still seeing mostly elderly, mostly Vietnam era veterans coming through the door. We do see obviously some younger veterans, but a lot of those conditions on that PACT Act list are things that are not going to affect these younger veterans for another 10, 20 years. Those cancers are not automatic. As soon as you're exposed, you get cancer. It'll be something that will develop over the next 10, 20 years. So we'll probably see a lot more of those veterans walking through our door. Most of the low-lying things that you'll see on the PACT Act would be like the respiratory things like bronchitis and sinusitis and things of those nature. For a lot of people, that's tolerable. I'm going to tolerate. I'm not going to go through the hassle of filing a claim. I'm just going to tolerate these conditions that are really not bothering me right now significantly. We're seeing most of our younger veterans. Most of what we're seeing from them is PTSD. That's the biggest impact that I'm seeing with the younger veterans as they're coming to us getting Service Connect. I mean, you've got somebody who's 30 years old getting 70% Service Connect for PTSD. That's tough.
Are you seeing, does that mirror what you're seeing, Kevin?
It is. I mean, out of our enrolled population, greater than half are Vietnam era or Vietnam veterans. I think it's just important that as we do this outreach that we continue to talk about. While we have outreach teams that go into the community, there is no better outreach than a veteran who gets their care in one of our facilities. And, that's why I'm so passionate about making sure people feel welcome when they come in that facility. They get the best health care anywhere. That veteran goes out and tells another veteran, hey, you need to come to the Manchester VA or whatever VA it is. There's no pamphlet or commercial or anything else that's going to substitute for that kind of one-on-one, direct advocate of someone saying, hey, we need, either you need help or, come join the family. So.
I want to echo that point you all made about the younger veterans. I hear from them, hey, I feel healthy now, and and they're very fiscally responsible because remember they're veterans. They're not your ordinary citizens. They're saying, I'm getting all this free stuff. I don't need it. And as I always tell them when they're in their 30s and 40s, lifting weights, running 15 miles a day, wait till you're 60. It all changes. And you're exactly right. It's because they feel invincible right now and down the road. My point I want to make, especially senators, is for you and your peers. The CBO does a great job, Congressional Budget Office, but every year they say we need to cut benefits of veterans. And I just go, thank you very much, because without us you wouldn't be able to say that. And it upsets me because right now our World War II veterans in 5 years will pretty much be gone. Now, not even count. Korean War veterans, same thing. Our Vietnam veterans, the youngest, are hitting 70, but mostly are in their 70s and 80s. And there's that big bubble, because in 1975, the all-volunteer force came in.
Right.
And the veterans who are coming after the Vietnam veterans are a much smaller group. We are not a voting sector. It used to be after World War II, the veterans were big voters. But now we're such small, we're going to be, in 10 years, we're only going to be like maybe 6% of the entire population. So every time I hear the CBO say, we got to cut benefits, I'm like, how come you're not cutting it to those who didn't serve their country?
Listen, I can't even begin to tell you the problems I have with CBO. But one of them is that they have what I think are very arbitrary, and the folks who work for the VA may want to, may have additions to this, but they have very arbitrary guidelines on what they look at in terms of costs. And so they're looking at the cost. Insulin is a good example that I'm very familiar with because I co-chair the Diabetes Caucus. So we're trying to increase coverage for insulin for people. And they're looking only at the cost of insulin. They said, well, if you lower the cost of insulin and make it available for everybody at $35 out of pocket, you're going to increase the use of insulin. Yeah, that's the goal. But they don't take into account the savings that happen because you've provided that benefit. And I think that's one of the things that's going on here. you know, the more people we can make sure understand what their benefits are, the sooner they have that opportunity, the more things we can catch earlier, and so people don't, as you were saying, Brett, so you don't have those outcomes later in life for people because you've caught the condition earlier.
Exactly.
And those savings are not reflected by CBO.
I think that goes back to my Gordian knot of the whole VA. That is, the purpose of medicine is to make us feel better. Well, if I feel better, my condition disappears and I don't get the money. So, you know, that's why I call it the Gordian knot. We want to get better. We also want that money. And I personally don't have the answer to that. And King Solomon probably does, but nobody else does.
I think it's important, Greg, you mentioned, you know, veterans who are healthy or perceive themselves healthy don't want to take away benefits or resources for somebody else. We need to dispel like that. You know, that has zero impact on the budget of who we take care of, and you know, I would rather have them in our system, monitoring them when they're healthy, preventing them from getting sick, but just dispelling the fact that we can't provide that care to somebody else because of that.
The truth of the matter is that people wanted to help us with our budgets. The one thing
they'd all sign up.
The more everybody should enroll. That is the one way that we'll get better budgets moving forward, right? So, yeah.
I want to mention back on the younger veteran. I think another reason why I may not be seeing as many younger veterans in my office is because I think the military is doing a whole lot better at preparing them on the way out the door. So they're doing these claims before they walk out. So I'm not seeing them because they've already got their claim done. The VA does provide the opportunity for those who are getting ready to separate to do a BDD claim, benefits upon delivery discharge, I believe it's called, where you can apply for your claim 6 months before you get out of the military. So you've finished your TAP class, then you do your first claim. So when you walk out, your percentage is already established, and you don't need a VSO. So that might also be another reason why we're not seeing younger people coming to my office, is because they're already taken care of, because the services are doing better at that.
The other thing too is we got to reach out to the families of the veterans. I'm dealing currently, my father is in very poor health, 94 years old. And so my sister and brother go, what can the VA help us with? Because, you know, all the things that are happening. And another friend of mine here in New Hampshire, his wife has to become his caregiver. You know, they didn't know where to turn to, so I got them to talk to the VA. You guys will take care of them. But we forget that the families are trying to take care of these elderly, especially Korea, World War II, but soon to be the Vietnam veterans. You know, they're going to be at that stage where they have their families trying to take care of them. So if you reach to the families, I don't know how you do it, but we got to remember that there are families that are impacted out there.
That's like having caregiver support. So many, you know, other programs out there to assist now that we didn't have before, that are wonderful.
Exactly. But people don't necessarily know about them, and that's part of the point of trying to do this kind of a discussion, and having community television here is really important to get that word out.
That the VA, my father hated the VA, even though my mother worked there for 20 years. He goes, you go there to die. You know, this is in the 1970s, 80s. I said, Dad, it's not that way. Yeah, but you guys, both Vermont and New Hampshire, you've done a fantastic job in changing that, because when I retired from the Army, it was not that way. And if I talk to my fellow soldiers in the Southwest, particularly Arizona, New Mexico, they're terrible conditions. And I compliment you guys up here, thankfully, that we live up here. But the VA overall, and I did write a paper for the VA secretary a few years ago about how the VA is an island. Every island is different, and nobody talks to each other. You guys do, fortunately, but that's not the case everywhere in the country. But that dispelling the idea that the VA is where a place you go to die, we've got to change that, especially for our older veterans who need that care now as they get older, because, you know, someone has to take care of them.
We are very fortunate in New England. I mean, New England being the medical mecca of the universe, you know, anyway, but to have the resources we have all within, you know, a 60 and 90-minute drive, you would die for that in other areas of the country. We're very fortunate.
Siblings to move out of New York, because I said, if you lived up here, Dad'd be taken care of.
Actually, if I could respond to a couple of things he said. One, of course, we should all want to do more work to make sure that everybody knows what's available. That's a constant challenge that we have. In Vermont, New Hampshire, folks like you that help, you guys do a great job at that, right? So, yes, we should continue to strive to do better and more, but you should also feel really good about how good of a job you all do to help with that mission as it stands. I come from the Midwest originally, and I've worked for other VAs, and you may not realize how much better at this that you all are, just as it stands, right? And you should feel very proud about that. And I think it's a really fantastic characteristic of the communities in New Hampshire and Vermont both, that there's so many people dedicated to that work. So I just want to say thank you for doing it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, we hear that old adage of it takes a village, and it truly does. And for me, I've had an opportunity through VA to live in various states across the country in the time that I've worked for VA, and without a doubt, we're doing it a lot different, and a lot of it is because of our community partners leaning in to help us, to help amplify our reach in ways that we typically can't. And it's been very helpful, even here just in New Hampshire, the military leadership team, the work that group does through Mr. Perry and the others that participate in that group. That has really helped be able to open doors for opportunities for veterans in ways that maybe the federal government cannot based on our laws, but there's always someone raising their hand to say, yes, we can pick up where you left off and help complement that. And that has made impacts just in the years that I've participated in that group in particular, to many veterans and their family members across the state of New Hampshire. And that's being replicated in Vermont as well. I think that it's necessary in order to be able to have viability for veterans in this community and be able to see our benefits impact them in ways that typically it's been very limited to be able to do.
Actually, Chris Scott, I don't know where he went, was just, there he is, was just saying that to me this morning, that sometimes people call our office, there's nothing we can do, there are no benefits that are available under legislation, but there are groups that we can call who then can provide the assistance. And you may want to expand on that, Chris.
Well, I would say that, we have, Haley Griffin's here today, and she does a lot of the casework for veterans cases. But every now and then, right, we'll get some really challenging calls where, the answer may not be at the VA, and it may not be a VBA thing, and I can think of several where we've actually reached out to Bill's office and there's nothing there. But, we've called on some of the other groups, and I don't want to call you out, Seth, but we reach out to Trooper Carr and say, is there anything in your wheelhouse, on your tool belt, that you can do to help? And, and I'm a little partial to the organization, but, thank goodness that the New Hampshire State Police has allowed Seth to do his work, not just for Department of Safety members, but for law enforcement, first responders across the state. So, thank you, Seth, for doing that.
Thank you, Sergeant. Mayor, Senator, once again, thank you. All my veterans love the VA. Thank God we have the New Hampshire Department of Veterans Affairs, life-saving. They de-escalate everything. My veterans, once they get into the White River Junction, Manchester VA, they love the services. They're very well taken care of. Thank God we have White River Junction with the emergency room over there. It's a life-saving service. If there's any problem, from last night at 5 o'clock to this morning at 5 o'clock, I had 3 veterans. They're just frustrated. Nothing had anything bad about the VA, but they're out there, and we calm them down, and we have such a great team. And there are no roadblocks. I have no roadblocks in taking care of these veterans. And we go throughout the state all the time. So God bless you, and thank you so much.
Amen. Well said. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions relative to screenings and the adjudication process on these new PACT Act claims. I've been an alumni of Manchester VA since 1978. During my career, I was active duty at the beginning, went into the reserve program, was activated, recalled to active duty a number of times as a reservist, forward deployed into Desert Storm. I came home a medical wreck from Desert Storm. There are substantial records, entries in my record relative to our screening. I did the Gulf War screening, and that documented a number of very concerning issues. This was going back in 2010, I think, or even before that, excuse me, 1999, I think it was. And some of those conditions have resolved slightly, most of them have worsened. My question to you folks is, now that a lot of the conditions that are listed on that original Gulf War screening were documented, are you going to go back that far and look at those things when I file a claim that now these things can be presumptive, or what? How does this whole thing work?
So from an adjudication standpoint, the VA is always required to look at, claims processors looking at the totality of the record that's contained for that veteran. We also have a duty to assist to go out and obtain any records that the veteran, may list as, military information that may have to be collected, or if they have a private treatment at a particular doctor. We are required to review all of that information every single time that we're looking at a claim coming in from a veteran.
So you actually look at all 40 years of my medical
They will
record?
look at the entire medical history and making that.
God bless you. You better put a whole team in that.
We do.
There's a lot of
We've
stuff.
hired over 8,000 claims processors because of the projections going into even fiscal year 25, looking ahead at how many claimants we're receiving nationwide, and preparing a workforce for that. It's not an easy feat, much like Brett said earlier. It's going to take a long time to get that workforce completely fully trained and immersed in everything that's happening with PACT Act, the legislation alone, in addition to all the training that goes into preparing them to be able to look at that. But at the core of what we do is being able to look at that medical history, look at anything the veteran is putting at play for important aspects of where they were located when they were in the military, what were those situations that may have led to the actual disability. All of that is being considered as part of that, and it is a very tenuous process to be able to go through and looking through that documentation. I'm grateful that we're doing it in a paperless environment. Ask me about 15 years ago, there were people looking through physical file folders, page by page, looking at that information. So we've had a lot of help with technology to help us get us there. But still, it's...
I would say we all have that stack of papers, never get rid of that stack of papers, we guard them like a...
Are my records prior to 2010 electronically filed now, that you can access all that?
Everything that existed on paper has been imaged. And
I remember when I first came back from Gulf that they used to come in with literally 5 folders full of documents to sit down in front, and my physician was sitting there putting undocumented illness on all my visits and everything. I had so much going on, and he couldn't pin it down to any one thing, and he did that.
I could say, most of us that are physicians within the VA, at some time in our lives, have been on the business end of a file like that, trying to make heads or tails of it, right? And your comment about God bless you is definitely apt, right? It is a tremendous challenge from our perspective to really thoughtfully go through all of that and find the truth, right? And I mean, this is why, frankly, it's such a gift to the providers and to the clinicians to be able to sidestep questions about presumption and having to prove things like that. Because the fact of the matter is, I mean, I'm a highly trained physician. Whether I can prove something did or didn't link back to something that happened 40 years ago, like, that's a lot to ask, right? To find that as a matter of truth, right? And you're right. You're right to worry about how we're going to handle documents like that. But this is like very different now, right? And so I believe, just having lived on the other end of that experience in the past, that things are going to feel very different moving forward with the way that those decisions are made and investigated.
But we're still having problems getting a computer system from the DoD to match the VA one, right?
That doesn't help, certainly.
To me personally, it's a no-brainer if the DoD one is working, the VA, but it's all contractor and all that kind of stuff. But really, because there are still, I've got my files, medical files, I remember finally go to Hanscom and get them, and there are things not in my VA records that were in my military records that I got.
you know, just note that, you know, I was in the Army Medical Department when the first electronic medical record came out. It was like 92 or 93 when we were doing that. And, you know, hopefully, you know, there's documentation moving forward in all the legacy, you know, systems there. But before that, you're right. It's that paper shoebox that we all carry around with us that, you know, never to get rid of those pieces of paper.
On a submission of the application, in this particular case, is a verbal okay that they submitted it, or did they get a written confirmation that they submitted the application?
Well, and you know, everybody has to apply in writing for that benefit. If they go and visit a claims representative at any of our regional offices, or even a service officer, those individuals are able to assist the veteran with filing that claim and taking that information. Called agents as well for VA are able to take that information over the phone and help guide the veteran with how to file a claim as well.
That's what it was. I went to the seminar at the VA at the end of July, and I filed my notice of intent. I guess I sent it to DAV as my representative. But I didn't hear anything back for a week or so. So last Monday, I called the VA call center, and the gentleman I spoke to said there was nothing on file from that July visit. And he verbally stated to me that he filed me at that point over the phone. But I still haven't heard anything from anybody.
So hopefully we got to make sure we clarify a couple things. So you might be talking about an intent to file as opposed to a claim. Okay, so an intent to file is not a claim, it's an intent to file a claim. So you may have done an intent to file, and maybe the person you were talking to on the phone said it didn't see anything claim-worthy in the file, which would be true. You have to actually file a claim. The intent was just exactly that. It's an intent.
Well, I think that's great.
I asked that specific question. I said, I told him, do I need to formally file a claim before today,
no,
or do I just get my place in line by filing a notice of intent?
That's correct. So the intent is in there, but you have to now file the claim. So the VA is not going to do anything until they get a claim to do something.
That's a variance of what I was told.
See, that's what happens. That's why I asked Bill to come. It's possible that he doesn't have a claim. He's not going to get retroactive.
Oh, he'll get retroactive.
No, yeah, let's clarify that.
He has the intent to file. So that preserves the retro. That intent to file document preserves the retro.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get.
Now we
Okay.
need to file the claim.
But the question is, do you have any, does he have any proof that he's had that intent to file if he calls up and they say?
That's the question.
Yeah.
So there's a couple ways you can solve it. To answer that question, you can talk to your representative at the DAV. He can look at your file and tell you whether or not there's been an intent to file. You can also call the VA at the 1-800 number and ask them. I called them yesterday and it took over an hour to get through because of the time we're dealing with right now. Everybody's trying to get these last-minute intents in. It's causing a backlog. So, but you can call them and ask if your intent to file is there. And if it's not, you can tell them right there on the phone, then please file me an intent, and they'll do it right then and there. Okay? Just that, again, to still protect you. Or you could go, when you finish here, you can go to the 6th floor for the North Cotton Federal Building.
My staff right there.
Yep.
Yes. All right.
There's the answer to the
And then you take your social security number
Let's
down.
do
They
that
tell you whether you're
before you go.
You don't need to call it.
Well, as luck would have it, DAV's having the national convention this week.
Yes.
None of my DAV people are accessible.
So if you want to find out today, I would recommend going to Norris Cotton after this on the 6th floor and having them poke your social security number.
We can do it right
Yeah,
here,
we
Bill.
can do
They're
it
ready.
right here.
They've got all their documents.
They're ready.
Everything fired up and ready to go.
I'll be seeing you in a few
But
minutes.
this is a perfect example of,
Yes,
of another
exactly.
20,000 people asking these, you know, same types of
But
questions.
just to clear up, because people say that all the time, is it a requirement that they send you a document other than just verbal? Because you know how verbal goes. Well, you really don't understand what I said. So is it a requirement once you file a claim?
Well,
They send you something?
when you file a claim, yes. If a claim is filed, the VA will send the claimant a notice letter acknowledging receipt of the claim and going from there. And then a decision letter, you know, after the decision is made.
The same thing with intent.
Right.
But we're talking about, you just did it the end of July, that intent letter may not have come to him yet. So he filed at the end of July, he did an intent to file at the end of July, it takes a little while for that stuff to go out in the mail. So maybe he just hasn't received his letter yet saying, we have your intent to file. And when they give you that letter that said we received your intent to file, they'll also give you the claim form.
Right, the DAV gentleman told me back at the July encounter that I would be receiving a call within 3 or 4 days first to start setting up everything. I didn't hear anything. That's what triggered my follow-on to approach VA. And that's when they told me it was absent.
So that's the part I don't understand.
So the dynamic of the DAV National Convention, my thing was at Manchester VA, when I sat down with the DAV rep, all he did was he moved that up to the service officer. Well, the service officer's been out of office with the convention, so that particular request was not acted upon. And that's why it was absent when I called VA the following 2 weeks later. And then that's when he said over the phone that he had filed for me. He filed the notice of intent, but I still haven't heard anything subsequent to that.
Well, like I said, yeah.
I'll check that.
Yes.
Okay. And then you got to get your claim in. So as soon as Jesse gets back from the National Convention, you need to set an appointment with Jesse to go in and actually file. So
we'll figure it
Well,
out.
if you leave me your information at the end, I can connect you with someone at DAV that can help you as well.
God bless. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm getting the high sign, and I know we promised all these folks that we would have them out in an hour. So thank you all for coming, for the good questions, and thank you to Brett and Kevin and Ina and Bill for not just for being here this morning, but for the great work that you do every day to help support our veterans. So we will be in touch.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.